Bonjour, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Je m'appelle Guillaume Saint-Pierre et je serai votre modérateur. So welcome to this press conference on the wildfire season. We are joined today by Minister of Emergency Preparedness Harjit Sajjan, Ministre de l'Environnement Stephen Guilbeault, Ministre des Ressources naturelles Jonathan Wilkinson, and Minister of Indigenous Services Patty Hajdu. So I believe that everyone will make a quick statement and then we will go to questions. Ministers.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. Thank you for joining us this morning for an update on the wildfire situation in Canada. First, I want to thank all the firefighters and public safety personnel who continue their amazing work across the country to keep all of us safe. There are now 69 active wildfires burning. To date, 500,000 hectares have burned. Now, but in spite of this situation, the good news is that the number of fires is well below average for this time of the year. It is also well below the 10-year average for the total area burned for this time last year as well. Now, as of June 12th, Canada is at a national preparedness level 2. This indicates that wildfire activity is increasing within one or more jurisdictions, while the demand for firefighters' equipment is light in other jurisdictions. Now, that being said, multiple regions are at an elevated risk due to a combination of hot, dry, and windy conditions. Now, the key areas of concern include northeastern British Columbia, northern Alberta, south-central Northwest Territories, and northern Quebec. There are also several new wildfires over east central and west central Quebec, which is the region of most risk for this upcoming week. While expected, rainfall is in some regions may reduce the risk of fire. Thunderstorms and associated lightning strikes present a concern of new ignitions, though. Potential flash flooding could also complicate firefighting efforts. Now, I continue to urge all Canadians to be prepared. When it comes to wildfire, it's an important part of their prevention education. So I encourage all Canadians to check out the Fire Smart program online. It can help you to protect your home and also your community. For additional information, Canadians can also check out the wildfires page on canada.ca for updates and access to the government services. If you do not already have an emergency kit, visit the getprepared.ca to find out what you need to build one and to create your own household plan. Now, once again, I wish to urge all Canadians to continue to look out for one another, follow the local directions, and remain vigilant. Finally, I'd like to thank all the firefighters, emergency personnel, and many volunteers who remain dedicated to helping us fight wildfires and keeping Canadians safe. We're all tremendously grateful for their efforts. Thank you very much, and now I'll pass it off to Minister Hajdu.
Well, hello, everybody. It's a joy to be with you here on the territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And of course, as we've said before, many First Nations are affected by climate change. In fact, disproportionately so. 80% of communities are in areas of risk of wildfire. And it's frustrating for those communities to hear conversations from largely conservative politicians denying their reality of the risk of wildfire, denying the reality of climate change. In fact, First Nations people frequently speak to me about the devastating impact of climate change in their communities as they work to keep each other safe. In fact, since April 1st and as of June 5th, 2024, wildfires have affected 31 First Nations communities across the country. Some of these communities include Wabanaki, Fort Nelson First Nation, Doig First Nation, and these fires have resulted in the evacuation of members from 6 First Nations communities, with one ongoing partial evacuation in Saskatchewan. Ça peut être un été difficile, mais on a travaillé avec la communauté pour être prêt. Et leur travail et préparation montrent des résultats. On réagit plus vite et on sauve de temps, de bâtiments et de vies. Prenons par exemple la Première Nation Doig River. 14 jours après avoir été évacués, ils ont été capables de retourner à la maison et de commencer le processus de rapatriement. In many First Nations, this is being made possible by emergency management coordinators. On top of government teams ready to support First Nations, there are now 255 filled coordination positions on the ground funded by the federal government. In Whitefish Lake First Nations number 128, Rennie Houle has been volunteering to help manage wildfires in her community. And thanks to new federal investments, the First Nation has been able to hire her full-time so that they can be prepared and react if wildfires threaten their community. As we speak, all First Nations in Alberta and now Manitoba have emergency coordinators. And this is part of the plan to transition to the self-determined approach because First Nations have always known what best they need. For example, in Saskatchewan Meadow Lake Tribal Council, they have received preparedness and mitigation funding following severe wildfires, and this is enabling community members to better prepare for evacuations and to reduce their dependence on outside organizations. In Manitoba, a Pine Creek First Nation has enhanced their capacity with Fire Smart funding following a wildfire in May 2020. So with that money, they were able to do wildfire training for members, purchase equipment, manage vegetation, raise awareness, and lead fire prevention information sessions for their community members. Je sais que beaucoup de gens sont anxieux en ces moments à cause de feux de forêt. Les communautés savent que ça peut être un été difficile et que beaucoup vont devoir être évacués. But we will be beside communities, as we have been before, during and after wildfires. And we will do this in a way that respects self-determination, Indigenous leadership, and wisdom. Miigwech, merci.
Bonjour à tous. As I have said a number of times when we've actually been together, we certainly talk a lot about climate change these days. The planet is burning up, and climate change is indeed a significant factor. As folks know very well, last summer Canadians experienced the most destructive forest fire season in Canadian history. The federal government has been working and is working aggressively to ensure that Canadians are prepared to respond to wildfires this season and into the future. Mais cette épreuve nous a aussi permis de tirer de nombreuses leçons sur ce que nous pouvons faire pour encore mieux nous préparer à affronter des incendies toujours plus fréquents et plus intenses. Earlier today, Government of Canada experts led a wildfire forecasting briefing to share what data is telling us this wildfire season may look like. Unfortunately, this forecasting continues what has become an alarming but an all too predictable trend. Climate forecasts indicate that the coming summer months will likely be warmer than normal in most of Canada, with parts of the country seeing less rainfall than normal. Les niveaux élevés d'activité des feux de forêt devraient persister dans les régions qui subissent d'intenses sécheresses, plus particulièrement dans le nord-ouest de l'Alberta, le nord-est de la Colombie-Britannique et la partie méridionale des territoires du nord-ouest. Compared to the forecast issued in May, the expected area of highest fire risk has shifted from British Columbia to the Prairie provinces and to most of the Northwest Territories. For June, there is a higher likelihood of above normal fire activity across much of Canada, stretching from the edge of British Columbia across Canada to western Labrador, New Brunswick, and southern Nova Scotia. In July 2024, fire activity is possible from Yukon and eastern British Columbia across to western Quebec. The most intense region is likely to be from northeastern British Columbia across the Northwest Territories and the Prairie provinces. This forecast underscores the importance of wildfire mitigation and, of course, of climate adaptation. This government has made significant and long-term investments since 2015, and just a few highlights. Last year, we announced and then fast-tracked agreements with provinces and territories to deliver $250 million of equipment, which is supporting the procurement of life-saving equipment and personnel for this 2024 season. We currently have agreements signed with Manitoba, British Columbia, and the Northwest Territories to access their entire allocation of funding through this program, and work is well advanced to conclude agreements with all other eligible jurisdictions in the coming weeks. We also announced $28 million to fund the training of additional firefighters and are on track to train 1,000 additional firefighters by the end of this year, which is 3 years ahead of schedule. And I was pleased to announce an $800,000 increase in funding for the International Association of Firefighters to bolster their successful program that trains municipal firefighters to fight fires in the municipal wildland interface. Dans le cadre de budget 2024, nous doublons le crédit d'impôt pour les pompiers volontaires qui passera de 3 000 à 6 000 $. Last week, I was at the annual Canadian Council of Forest Ministers meeting in Cranbrook, British Columbia. And alongside my provincial and territorial colleagues, we discussed all of government approaches to the 2024 wildfire season in Canada. We are working together to prepare for whatever the next few months have in store. We also came together to collectively launch the Canadian Wildland Fire Prevention and Mitigation Strategy, which recognizes the importance of mobilizing whole-of-society actions towards wildland fire resilience. The strategy will identify activities and allows us to proactively and collectively plan and prepare for wildland fires, recognizing that contributions and implementation will vary across Canada based on existing programs and diverse needs. Il ne s'agira pas d'un document statique. Il évaluera au fur et à mesure que des progrès seront accomplis dans la réalisation des engagements et des objectifs et que les partenaires de l'ensemble de la société continueront à définir les priorités. Now more than ever, we need to mobilize to obtain new support, improve integration and horizontal collaboration so that this strategy is effective and achieves its goals. This is not just words. The strategy includes specific targets and measures of progress to ensure that the federal government and our provincial and territorial partners are taking the action needed to protect lives and livelihoods. La gravité des incendies de forêt au Canada ces dernières années fait ressortir l'urgence de cette stratégie et montre bien pourquoi nous devons continuer à prévenir et à atténuer les risques d'incendie avant que des feux ne se déclarent. Ce sont nos maisons, nos communautés et notre environnement qui en dépendent. Wildfires, as folks know, have always occurred across Canada. What is new is their frequency and their intensity. And the science is clear, the root cause of this is climate change. That is why Canada has one of the most comprehensive climate plans in the world, and we are continuing to move forward on it every day. Certainly, government's most immediate priority must be to protect Canadians' lives and their livelihoods, and increasingly this starts with accepting the scientific reality of climate change and taking thoughtful, impactful action to address it. That is something that Canadians should expect from all of their political leaders at the federal level and at provincial and territorial levels. It is unfortunately something we do not yet have at the federal level, where not all federal political leaders have made a commitment to fighting climate change. Climate change is a science issue. It is not a political issue. It should not be a partisan issue. That is why Canadians deserve and expect thoughtful action from politicians about the risks that climate poses to our children's future, to our economy, and to our communities. And as I have said before, that is exactly what this federal government is doing today, will be doing tomorrow, and will be doing for the days and months to come. Thank you very much for joining us today. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui pour cette conférence de presse. Alors, comme vous l'avez entendu de mes collègues, les météorologues d'Environnement et Changement climatique Canada continuent de prévoir des conditions printanières et estivales pouvant poser un plus grand risque de feux de forêt en 2024. Alors que nous ressentons déjà les impacts des changements climatiques, notre capacité à coordonner, à collaborer, à nous préparer demeure notre plus grande force. Environment and Climate Change Canada's experts continue to predict weather conditions for this summer that could lead to elevated wildfire risks. The Government of Canada's priority, as we face what is shaping to be another difficult wildfire season, is the safety and well-being of Canadians. Our ability to coordinate, collaborate, and prepare is our greatest strength as we navigate growing challenges in a changing climate. But what else the government is doing to help our communities adapt to the impacts of climate change? Well, yesterday, Environment and Climate Change Canada introduced a new heatwave climate attribution pilot. With this tool, climate scientists can now calculate to what extent human-caused global warming played a role in making heat waves more likely. And just last week, Environment and Climate Change Canada announced improvements to its air quality forecasting model to better support Canadians during wildfire events. We're now issuing a red banner air quality advisory to alert Canadians when the air quality health index exceeds a rating of 10 for 3 or 4 more hours during wildfire smoke events, representing a very high risk levels. Lastly, I announced last week the launch of the Local Leadership for Climate Adaptation Initiative, a new $530 million federal initiative through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. It is one of the largest ever investment in climate adaptation in Canada's history. Over the next 8 years, this new initiative will support more than 1,400 municipal adaptation projects, helping communities become more resilient and livable. Some of these projects could address better wildfire planning and infrastructure, for example. Municipalities are encouraged to apply by August 16th. Alors, la semaine dernière, notre gouvernement a mis en place une gamme d'outils et de programmes utiles pour nous aider à nous adapter aux effets néfastes des changements climatiques. Nous avons introduit un projet pilote qui nous permettra de mieux comprendre comment les changements climatiques agissent sur les événements de chaleur extrême. Nous avons amélioré la cote air santé afin de mieux alerter la population canadienne lorsque la fumée des feux de forêt met leur santé en danger. Enfin, nous avons annoncé un nouveau programme d'1 demi-milliard de dollars pour assister les municipalités à mettre en place des projets d'adaptation au changement climatique, comme ceux liés à la planification et à la protection contre les incendies de forêt. C'est l'un des plus importants investissements de l'histoire canadienne en matière d'adaptation au changement climatique. Les municipalités doivent présenter leurs demandes d'ici le 16 août. Nous les encourageons fortement à le faire. La priorité de notre gouvernement est, demeure et va demeurer la sécurité et le bien-être des Canadiens et des Canadiennes. Merci. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now go to questions. Reporters connected online can use the raise hand function if they wish to ask a question. Okay. Jolie Lee, City News.
I'm not sure who would necessarily take this, but has there been any discussions within cabinet on the idea of a national firefighting service? It's been a demand of some climate protesters for the last 2 seasons or so, and NDP MP has sent that letter on the idea. Has this been discussed or explored at all?
So I can take that question. First of all, we are exploring many different options of how we can better work together with the province and territories to for a wildfire response. And I've taken that into account, and we are looking at what are the best methods. But in this case here, we have to be very, very mindful when, for example, creating a national wildfire. Like right now, the timing of this would be extremely off. For example, if we were to set up a force right now, we'll be actually drawing from the resources that are actually needed at the municipal and the provincial level. So that's one of the reasons. So what we're doing right now is actually working with Wilkinson and Arcan to push as many resources now to training of firefighters. And so those firefighters can be effective on the ground, training that right leadership. So we're making sure that the right resource is getting to the right place at the right time. Now, as we look at this, yes, we are looking at various options. What would be a better federal response? So we're going to be looking at that option. One of the things that we'll also be doing, looking at other options, and then testing it out through tabletop exercises on what actually can work. We got to work out the logistics. What can be the quickest response? Because it's easy to throw ideas out there, and I mean I have my own. But the thing is, we need to make sure that we challenge one another so that the most effective response can be there. And that's what we're really focused on. And this is going to take a little bit of time to work on. But most importantly, right now, the most effective resource is training firefighters and getting them into the fight against wildfires.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure. As a follow-up, just in terms of drawing away resources during a time when they're needed, that's perfectly fair enough. But given that the season's expected to be kind of mild right now, or at least that's what the forecast and the tech briefing said, would it not be prudent to lay some of the groundwork on such a hypothetical national firefighting service at this time?
Work is ongoing, actually from last year, and what type of work we would need. One of the key things of the gaps that we needed to fill is on when it comes to evacuees, making sure that we firefighters who are on the ground are actually dealing with wildfires and not setting up camps. So that's where the our NGOs, the Humanitarian Workforce Program, is taking effect. We're making available through the pilot project in BC and Northwest Territories, where additional resources can be provided. And we are looking at various options to looking at what other resources that can be provided. But the key thing here is, like, even right now, we say that things are mild. That can change literally within a week. And that's the last thing we want to do, is all of a sudden trying to come up with something, pull resources away, and all of a sudden you have to make a shift. One of the things that we have discussed is at the provincial territorial level. I've visited a lot of the firefighters and various organizations, and one of the key thing is we need to make sure that the resources are available at the ground, and we are going to be looking at various options. And I appreciate all the advice that has been given and some very good ideas. But one of the things we need to do is making sure that in Canada, that the right resource is going to get to the right place at the right time. And I'll keep repeating this, because if we don't, the last thing I want is where there's a resource being built, but we can't actually bring it, bring it into a province quick enough. One of the things I'm focused on also is how can we be less reliant on international firefighters. There are additional resources. We are looking at some options through the Humanitarian Workforce Program. For example, we have identified about over 1,300 potential people who already have training through SARVAC that potentially can do this. So we're working on these options, but it has to complement the work that's happening on the ground.
In response to that question, I think that I think maybe you didn't hear fully the remarks, but the mobilization of Indigenous peoples and firefighters is a really important component of the way that we're evolving to fight fires. This is a partnership model with provinces, territories, and increasingly First Nations who have been left out of the scope of work. And actually, we've all suffered as a result of not actually using Indigenous knowledge that has, in many ways, served people for centuries. And so, when we're talking about an overlay of a federal system, I think, whatever we do, it needs to be in partnership with the people closest to the crisis, who are the keepers of the knowledge of that area, who understand their communities the best, who are developing expertise with additional resources from the federal government for for training, for coordination, for participation in forest firefighting. And I think a request to have a national or a federal service in some ways undermines what Indigenous people have been saying, which is we want an active, autonomous role to play that works in partnership with the federal government and with provincial and territorial governments.
Okay, Stephen Jeffrey, Ill Times.
Good morning. I'm not sure which minister this would be best directed to, perhaps Minister Wilkinson, but just taking a look at the wildfire report, the wildfire mitigation and preparedness strategy, it does mention some proactive measures to link with the national adaptation strategy, that by 2025, 50% of Canadians have taken concrete actions to better prepare for and respond to climate change risks facing their household. Just wondering if you could provide some examples of what those concrete actions could be.
So, sure. And as you say, that's one of the target. There are quite a number of targets. These are federal, provincial, territorial, because the document is an FPT document. It includes things like a percentage of communities that actually have taken action as well and are wildfire prepared. But certainly, the document is focused on ensuring that you are taking appropriate action, whether it's communities or it's individuals. And a good example of individuals is what is actually done through the Fire Smart program, which is something that we fund at the federal level. Provinces and municipalities implement that. But it gives very specific steps for homeowners to essentially protect their homes. So ensuring that there's not a lot of debris nearby, trying to ensure that you have some space between the housing and trees, ensuring that you're actually cleaning your gutters in an area where there is forest fires, taking away things like wooden chairs off of your lawn. There's a whole bunch of very small but actually important things that actually help homeowners to better protect themselves and their homes.
And if I can add, we've started having conversations with companies, for example, namely insurance companies, who already have contacts with millions of Canadians through the insurance they provide to homeowners, and to see whether or not we could partner with them to be able to make information available to their customers on things like wildfire or floodings, which, I mean, it's not something we're talking about this morning, but it is another important impacts that Canadians are facing because of increasing climate change.
Follow-up?
That does lead into a second question that I have, which is it does look in some of the maps that we saw this morning, there is some areas of lower expected rainfall, but also some areas of higher expected rainfall. So I guess, is the federal government currently looking at the potential risks of flooding in some areas like Western British Columbia, for example?
Yes, we are. In fact, actually, one of the concerns, obviously, through the rainfall and melt, even though there has been less snow, certain areas will potentially can have greater flooding. One area of particular concern, actually, is where from last year's wildfire season, that literally scorched the earth, and so now any type of rainfall is going to be flowing, and there's potential mudslides that actually can occur. That will also potentially, we're looking at potential impacts to rivers and even water sources. So that is becoming a significant concern as well. And in addition to just rainfall, we have to be very mindful right now and concerned about flash floods. We've already seen, I mean, I wasn't here, but I heard there was a significant rainfall here in Ottawa that had an impact. So those are all those things that we're taking into account, but this is just another example of the extreme weather through the weather patterns that are changing. And again, I just want to be very mindful, even though certain things might seem mild or certain rainfall in a certain area, the conditions are extremely dry. There's not enough rainfall, and in fact, actually, I forget the exact numbers, but somebody was saying there has to be a few atmospheric river events to even get the water levels up. And just imagine if that was to take place. Imagine the flooding that would actually happen. So the situation is extremely dry, and as things heat up, we need to be very mindful of this, that the situation literally can change within a day or two or even a week.
That I think what's not helpful is seeing primarily conservative politicians undermine the knowledge that Canadians need in times like this. Canadians need to have accurate information based on reality so they can protect themselves, their homes, and their communities. And so it does a huge disservice to Canadians when we see conservative politicians undermine that kind of knowledge that Canadians need to keep themselves safe.
Palak Mangat, Parliament Today.
Hi, thank you. I think I can hear you now.
Yes, we hear you.
Minister Guilbeault, I'd like to get your reaction to the federal court finding today that your 8-month delay for the emergency order on spotted owls fell short. Will you appeal this?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Yes, I was asking if you would be appealing the federal court ruling on spotted owls.
So, as you probably know, the Species at Risk Act is a very powerful tool that the federal government has at its disposal to protect species and their habitat. And when there is a finding by Environment and Climate Change Canada scientists that the habitat of a species is not adequately protected, I have the legislative obligation to go to Cabinet and recommend that an emergency order be put in place to protect the habitat of said species. Now, Cabinet has obviously the liberty of deciding whether or not this emergency order should be put in place, or whether or not an alternative scenario should be explored, like negotiating with the province, in that case the government of British Columbia, and that's what's been happening on the spotted owl. We have been working very closely with the government of British Columbia on spotted owl recovery. We've been working with Indigenous nations in British Columbia on this. You may recall that we signed an historic agreement, the first of its kind in the country, a tripartite agreement worth about $1 billion between the nations of the Indigenous nations of British Columbia, the province, and the federal government. So we're doing a number of things to try and ensure that we can protect the habitat of all species. We have a lot of work to do, obviously, and since that court ruling was just issued, we will obviously be looking at it very closely to see how we need to respond.
And just as a follow-up as well, Minister, what have you seen the decision? What is your takeaway from this decision? Maybe in other cases where you could be considering issuing an emergency protection order for other at-risk species.
So I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I had a quick briefing on it. I will obviously be reading it. And you say we couldn't. We have, in fact, in some instances, issued emergency order to protect certain species where we felt that negotiation with a province was not possible, or we had tried that and it didn't work. So it's not we take these decisions are taken on a case-by-case basis. It's not one size fit all. The situations vary greatly across the federation and across species as well.
Okay, I don't see any other raised hands, so I guess this is what ends the press conference. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.